Some crimes shock the world because of how they happen. Others shock the world because of who commits them. But the most chilling crimes are the ones that don't make sense at all. No clear motive, no clear pattern, and sometimes no clear ending. This is the story of a case that investigators still reference today, not because it was the most violent, not because it was the largest, but because it was one of the most psychologically disturbing cases ever recorded. Because at its core, it wasn't just a crime, it was a complete breakdown of logic. Let's begin. It started like any ordinary day. A quiet neighborhood, routine activity, people going to work, children going to school, nothing unusual, until something small disrupted that normality, a missing person report. At first, it didn't seem urgent. People go missing for many reasons. They leave, they travel, they disconnect. But this case was different, because almost immediately, something felt off. There was no financial activity, no communication, no digital trace, and no reason to disappear. That was the first red flag. Investigators began by retracing the last known movements. The victim had been seen doing something completely ordinary. No distress, no confrontation, no warning signs, just a normal interaction. And then, nothing. It was as if the person had simply stepped out of existence. Now, here's where the case begins to shift from missing person to something far more serious: surveillance footage. In many cases like this, footage provides clarity. But here, it only deepened the mystery. The victim was seen walking alone, no one following, no visible threat, no unusual behavior, and then they entered a location that would later become the center of the entire investigation. And after that moment, there was no exit footage, no continuation, no trace. That's when investigators realized something important. This wasn't random. This was controlled. Now the investigation widened. Forensics, digital data, witness interviews, timeline reconstruction. But every layer they uncovered raised more questions than answers, because there were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no obvious weapon, no immediate evidence of what had occurred. And yet, something had clearly happened. Now investigators began to focus on behavioral patterns, because when physical evidence is limited, psychology becomes critical. They started analyzing connections, people in the victim's life, recent conversations, conflicts, unusual interactions. But again, nothing stood out. No enemies, no threats, no known disputes, which made the case even more unsettling, because without motive, there is no logic. And without logic, there is no prediction. Now the case shifted again to the environment, the location where the victim was last seen. Every detail mattered: doors, angles, entry points, timing. And here, investigators found something subtle, not obvious, not dramatic, but strange. A detail that didn't match the expected flow of events, a gap in timing, a moment where no activity was recorded. And in investigative work, gaps are everything, because gaps represent missing information, and missing information represents opportunity for manipulation. Now theories began to form. Was this planned? Was this opportunistic? Was there a third party involved? Or was the situation misunderstood entirely? Each theory had weaknesses. None fully explained the evidence. And that is what made the case chilling, because most crimes eventually form a pattern. This one did not. Now let's talk about behavior. Because behavior often reveals intention. In most cases, criminals display stress indicators: hesitation, errors, overcompensation. But in this case, there was an absence of clarity, no clear emotional trace, no predictable escalation, no identifiable trigger, which made investigators consider a more complex possibility: that the event was not spontaneous, but carefully controlled. Now attention shifted again to digital evidence: phones, messages, location data, search history. And while some data existed, it was fragmented, incomplete, or intentionally obscured, which raised another disturbing possibility: that someone understood how to avoid detection. Now the investigation entered its most difficult phase, because without clear evidence, Investigators had to reconstruct the event using probability, not certainty. And that introduces interpretation, and interpretation introduces error, but still, they pushed forward. Now, let's pause and understand something important. What makes a crime chilling is not always what is visible, it's what is missing. The absence of answers, the absence of motive, the absence of emotional logic, and this case had all three. Now, over time, investigators began narrowing possibilities, eliminating scenarios that didn't fit, and focusing on those that could explain the gaps. But even then, nothing fully aligned, which led to a difficult conclusion that the truth may never be fully recovered. Now, this is where public interest grows, because humans are drawn to unresolved patterns. Our brains seek closure, meaning, structure. But when those are missing, the mystery becomes more powerful than the facts. And this case became exactly that, a symbol of unanswered questions. Now, let's step back, because beyond the investigation, there is a larger lesson. Crimes like this reveal something deeper about systems, about vulnerability, about unpredictability, and about how quickly normal situations can shift into irreversible outcomes. They also reveal the limits of investigation itself, because no matter how advanced tools become, some events still resist explanation. Now, let's bring this to the final reflection. The most chilling crime ever recorded is not defined by violence alone. It is defined by uncertainty, by the inability to reconstruct a complete truth, by the gaps that remain even after exhaustive investigation, and by the realization that not everything leaves a trace that can be followed. Some events disappear into silence, and all that remains are fragments, data points, and unanswered questions. And perhaps that is what makes it truly chilling. Not what we know, but what we will never fully understand, because in the end, the most terrifying mysteries are not the ones that are solved, but the ones that remain open long after everyone has stopped looking.